On June 12, 2025, more than 25 years after he committed a brutal crime, George John Hanson was executed by lethal injection in Oklahoma. In this video, we'll uncover what happened, his last meal, and his last words on the evening of August 31st, 1999. 77-year-old Mary Bowles was just trying to load her car outside Tulsa Promenade Mall. A retired banker and longtime hospital volunteer, she had no idea two armed men were watching her. Waiting, their names were George John Hanson, also known as John Fitzgerald Hanson, and Victor Miller. And by that point, they had already robbed 2 liquor stores and now needed a clean vehicle to keep going. Victor jumped behind the wheel while John shoved Mary into the backseat at gunpoint. And that's when the real nightmare began. They drove north off the main roads and into the dark. Eventually, they pulled into a dirt pit near McAlester, somewhere they thought was empty. But it wasn't. Gerald Thurman, a 44-year-old trucking company owner, was there, making a delivery. He saw the car circling and knew something wasn't right. He called his nephew, gave a quick heads up, and hung up. Then minutes later, 4 shots were fired. Victor had pulled a revolver on him, and Gerald dropped where he stood, but he didn't die right away. However, John and Victor didn't wait to see if he survived. They drove off still with Mary trapped in the back somewhere along a rural stretch of road. They dragged her out. John threw her to the ground and shot her 4 to 6 rounds from a 9mm pistol. Then they left her there, tossed beneath a pile of branches like she was nothing. It wasn't until September 7th, exactly 1 week after the attack, that searchers found Mary's body. But Gerald was discovered much earlier. Locals heard the gunshots and immediately called it in. He was still breathing when help arrived, but sadly, he never regained consciousness. He died 2 weeks later in the hospital on September 14th. By then, the killers had vanished, and no one knew who they were. After killing Mary, John and Victor took her car and drove to the Oasis Motel. John walked in, asked about a room, then left only to return. Minutes later, saying the car wouldn't start. The clerk lent him a screwdriver and followed him outside there. He saw both men tinkering with the Ford, but eventually they gave up, returned the tool, and rented the room. John signed the card and even showed his driver's license. But that was the last time the clerk ever saw either of them, and the car stayed in the parking lot untouched over the next few days. They kept moving, robbing a liquor store on September 3rd, then a credit union on September 8th. But the walls were closing in on September 9th. Victor's own wife made an anonymous call, telling police they were hiding out at an Econogie, and that same day an officer also spotted Mary's car still parked at the Oasis Motel. With multiple jurisdictions now working together, officers tracked the suspects to the Econ. Victor surrendered quietly, but John barricaded himself in the room, and it took tear gas to force him out. Inside, officers found the murder weapons and extra ammo hidden in the toilet tank. And after that, forensics quickly sealed the case. They found John's fingerprint on the driver's seatbelt buckle in Mary's car, while Victor's print was on the front passenger side. Then came the witness that would drive the final nail in Rashad Barnes. A friend of John's testified that John had admitted to it all, bragging about carjacking an old lady, the kidnapping, and the killings. He said Victor shot Gerald, but it was John who pulled the trigger on Mary Bowles. Both men were charged with 2 counts of murder and several federal robbery charges, and this time there would be no escape by the time John finally faced a jury in May 2001. Almost 2 years after the attacks, his criminal record already stretched back nearly 2 decades: robbery, assault, and a life of violence. But now it was murder, and not just one, but 2 of them in Tulsa County. The courtroom stayed quiet as prosecutors detailed the carjacking, the execution-style killing of a 77-year-old woman, and the cold-blooded shooting of an innocent trucker. John sat through it all but showed no reaction on May 18th. After just 5 hours of deliberation, the jury returned with their verdict: guilty on both counts of first-degree murder, and on May 23rd, they made their recommendation for Mary's murder. They wanted death and for Gerald's life without parole. Their message was clear. There would be no second chances, but John didn't go straight to death row. Instead, he was sent to federal court for the bank robbery charges and sentenced to life in prison. He was transferred to USP Pollock, a high-security federal prison in Louisiana. And for years, he waited there, serving federal time while Oklahoma still held the right to carry out his execution. Victor Miller's trial came next, and it wasn't his first time in the hot seat. He had already served time for murder once before, but that sentence was reduced, and by 1997, he was a free man. However, just 2 years later, he was killing. Again in 2002, he stood trial for the same crimes as his co-defendant John, and was found guilty of both murders. The evidence was nearly identical as for John, and the result also the same. He received a death sentence for one and life without parole for the other. But Victor wasn't done fighting. He filed for appeals, and in 2015, Tulsa County prosecutors prosecutors took the death penalty off the table. Victor was sentenced to a second term of life without parole instead. John, however, wasn't so lucky. He also fought his death sentence, but the court didn't waver. His execution was first scheduled for December 15, 2022, but the Biden administration refused to transfer him back to Oklahoma. The state sued, but a federal judge sided with the prison system and paused the execution indefinitely. But that changed in 2025 after a shift in federal leadership. New Attorney General Pam Bondi approved the transfer, and on March 3rd, John was moved to death row at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary, and his execution date was set for June 12, 2025. At his clemency hearing on May 7th, John tried to explain himself, speaking through a video link. His voice low but steady, John expressed remorse for his involvement in the crimes and apologized to the victims' families. "I'm not an evil person," he said. "I was caught in a situation I couldn't control. I can't change the past, but I would if I could." However, during that hearing, clemency was denied, and the execution date remained in place. Gerald Thurman's son Jake said the moment was long overdue. He had waited almost 26 years. Jake called his father his hero and said he still saw him in his own children's faces. He also spoke about the pain of 2022 when the execution was delayed. His mother died not long after the postponement, and she never got to see the justice she had waited for. But just days before he was supposed to die, John Hanson caught what looked like a break. An Oklahoma County judge stepped in and hit pause temporarily, halting the lethal injection that had already been set in motion. John's lawyers argued something had gone wrong at the clemency stage. They claimed John never got a fair shot in front of the Pardon and Parole Board. The vote had been close 3-2 in favor of death. But one of those votes came from a board member who used to work for the same district attorney's office that put John on trial, that the defense said was a conflict of interest, and for a moment it worked. The stay held, but only for 2 days. A higher appeals court stepped in, overturned the decision, gave the green light, and the execution moved forward. No one knows if he'd been planning it all along or if the last-minute stay only pushed him further over the edge. But John didn't request anything special for his final meal. No favorites, no last indulgences, just the standard tray handed out that Wednesday evening, which was chicken pot pie, 2 rolled, 2 fruit cups and carrots, ordinary food on an extraordinary night. Then his final morning came on June 12, 2025. John was executed by lethal injection at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary, strapped to the gurney. John spoke his last words, "Just forgive me, and peace to everyone." The process was smooth without any reported complications. He was pronounced dead at 10:11 a.m. George John Hanson was 61 years old.